Bad messaging, a bungled response. Florida Senator Marco Rubio says the handling of the coronavirus crisis has been far from ideal.
He also says attacks on science have undermined efforts to control the spread of the disease. CBS 4's Jim DeFede spoke to Senator Rubio about that, but started on an issue critical for millions of unemployed Americans, the looming end to federal unemployment benefits.
Would you support extending the $600 payments?
I don't know yet, for a couple of reasons. On the one hand, obviously, the unemployment insurance will remain. What we're talking about is the additional $600 on top of it. On the one hand, you have a lot of people and employers and small businesses included that are saying to us that they believe that this is acting as a disincentive to bring people back to work. And that's what we're hearing from them. On the other hand is the reality that there are a lot of people that will tell you, we'd love to go back to work, but the place I work isn't open yet, and I can't pay my bills without it. So we got to work our way through it. So it's a complicated issue, and I'm sure it's one we're going to have to deal with because the Democrats have insisted on an extension of it. So we can't pass a bill without them voting for it. So it'll be one of those things we have to work through to see if we can figure out a way to help the people who really need it, while at the same time making sure that we haven't created a disincentive. And that's not an easy needle to thread, but it's one we have to work through.
Let me ask you this. In your heart, do you believe most Americans are just trying to stay at home and collect the extra $600? Or do you believe they're home, as you said initially, because we're telling them to stay home, because businesses are at limited capacity, some businesses are reclosing? Aren't the American people doing exactly what we've asked them to do? Shouldn't we be taking care of them by extending this benefit?
I think most people would rather have a job that's going to be there for months, not a benefit that's going to be there for 3 or 4. But at the same time, we can't ignore employers saying to us that they've tried to rehire people and who are unwilling to come back as long as the benefit is there because they're actually making more this way. Now, maybe the answer to that is to pay them more, which is what these businesses should consider. But we can't ignore what we're being told by some businesses out there.
Has the president bungled the response to this virus?
No, I think that's an unfair thing to say because, frankly, every country in the world is struggling with it. And people can point to New Zealand. Okay, New Zealand's a very small country that can basically seal off all travel and so forth. We're a large country, a populous country, a very mobile country. We're a state here in Florida where we have people that live here part of the year, or people that live here 6 months in a day for tax purposes and travel back and forth. We're a state that invites people to come from all over the world and to visit us, and they have family here that they visit as well. So I think bottom line is this is a respiratory virus. It spreads when human beings come in contact with each other, and there's no way to make that zero, the case load zero, until we have a vaccine. So the one area where I think we all could have improved on is sort of come up with a concise message that everyone is putting out there, as opposed to some of the conflicting messages. And I think everyone has shared blame in that. And that includes the CDC, who early on was discouraging people from using masks and on down from there. Because I do think that having sort of a unified message across every level of government that isn't partisan would be helpful in terms of this response. Instead, we've seen a lot of these things turn into sort of a partisan fight or a political statement about whether you're going to wear a mask or not wear a mask and that sort of thing.
And I accept that there's plenty of blame to go around, but when you talk about messaging, when you talk about trying to communicate with the public, nobody has a bigger pulpit, nobody has a bigger platform than the president. And it seems as if the president from the very beginning has underplayed, undermined all of the things. I mean, if there is a lot of blame to go around, the lion's share of it should not be on the president for the message that he's put out. I agree with you. I think messaging is critical in this, and the president has failed on that front.
Yeah, I think that, of course, has to be balanced with the things they have done and that go in a different direction. So even, yes, should we have been able to address this early on in a concise way and set the tone for the country from the White House on down? Of course. By the same token, they took actions that showed seriousness. For example, the mobilization of the American private sector. 3 months ago, we were all worried about ventilators. Now we have extraordinary capacity. The Operation Warp Speed that the White House has been very supportive of, which leaves us, I believe, at some point this fall, hopefully, with new therapeutic treatments that cut short the lifespan of this virus if infected, and unparalleled progress on a vaccine, which some believe we could have in place by the later part of this year, maybe more than one. Even as we speak, they're mass producing needles and syringes that they're going to need and able to deploy it. All of this has been driven at the federal level. So I do think they deserve credit for those things because those things are going to make a difference here pretty soon, hopefully.
What is your view of Dr. Fauci? Do you believe and trust the information you hear from Dr. Fauci?
I think he is an important voice in terms of giving us solid medical and scientific advice that, of course, has to be balanced with these other things. But I don't believe we have a Dr. Fauci problem. I think he's an important voice at that table, whose advice needs to be balanced with and taken into account alongside some other factors that are very important. But I don't understand the internals of it. I don't know where that comes from, frankly. I think that in the midst of a crisis such as this, all of our efforts should be focused on responding, and these sort of things we can deal with later.
Well, let me just ask it bluntly. Was Navarro wrong to write an op-ed like that?
I prefer he not write it. Obviously, he has the freedom to write whatever he wants, and I imagine, he got the approvals internally to do it. I do think it does, however, create this sort of continuing distrust. I have people telling me, well, I don't wear a mask because that's an effort to control me. Masks are not some novel invention. I mean, doctors, nurses, dentists have been using it forever to protect themselves and their patients. And if it has a 10% chance of working, if it has a 10% chance of getting us back to school, back to sports, back to business, work, and life, why not try it?
Jim joins us now. You and the senator also spoke about what school could look like in the fall. We heard him just say, if it gets us back to school, wear the mask. Why not try it? So where does he stand on that?
He sides with the president in the sense of wanting to get schools open. And again, let's face it, everyone wants to get schools open. The question is whether or not it can be done safely. Senator Rubio believes that it can be done in certain parts of the state safely. Now, this is a very real issue for him because he has at least 3 school-age children himself here in Dade County. So one of the questions I did ask him was, what will you be doing with your children this fall? He said his plans is to send them back into the brick and mortar schools that they attend. Now, they attend a private charter school, and if that school is able to open safely and has the resources to do so, he has no problem with sending them in. He also said, though, that it has to be an individual decision by parents, especially weighing the health concerns of others who may be in the household.
Jim, perhaps on a much lighter note, Senator Rubio wants naval intelligence to prepare a public report on UFOs. What's that all about? As the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Rubio very quietly, just about a month or so ago, attached into a bill that's working its way through the Senate this idea of wanting to know some of the aeronautical, differences that we're sort of seeing. What we call UFOs, he doesn't want to use that term, the Navy doesn't use that term, but he says there are objects flying over military bases, encountering civilian airliners, encountering military jets, that they just cannot explain these phenomena. And he wants to know, now, is it from another galaxy? Is it from China? These are the questions that he's trying to answer. And he says there's no reason to keep this information classified. He wants the Office of Naval Intelligence to issue a report, go through everything, release it publicly, and let's try to get some answers. So, for those old fans of the old TV series, he believes the truth is out there.
Just another thing to look out for in 2020.
Sounds like a job for Space Force.
There you go.
Jim, thanks a lot. Watch more of Jim's interview with Senator Rubio, as well as his conversation with Roger Stone this Sunday on Facing South Florida at 11:30 a.m. right here on CBS 4.